Carson, Leno, Fallon. Now, it's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Isis Daniel, way out in the Washington, D.C. area. Introductions in just a moment. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and click a thumbs up for me. If you don't have a thumbs up, then don't bother doing anything. And have a listen to a recent release of Rex Pickett, the famed author of Sideways. He's back in the scene, and we ran into him in Napa, had a great conversation with him. So he's at winetalkspodcast.com. But now we're here to have a conversation with Isis, the Millennial Somm. I love that term, the Millennial Somm. Are you a millennial for one? Is that?
I am a millennial. I'm actually on the tail end, depending on where you get your, statistics from. I'm either the last millennial or the year before the last. So, woot woot, go millennials.
Yes. Well, I raised three, and I guess I use that term loosely, raised, all hardworking girls, and so I understand. Well, no, I don't understand the generation, frankly. What I do understand, there are, as you're saying, older millennials, and that's kind of scary because we've already gone through the generation.
Yes, millennials are in their 40s. So I have my second oldest brother is a millennial, and he's at the top of the list, and he's in his 40s. So it's crazy.
Well, tell me then, how is it? Because you are a wine professional. You have a level 3 WSET degree, WSET. Headed to Paris, which is really cool. We'll talk about that. Yes. To get your diploma, which is the highest level of WSET recognition and certification. But the millennial generation is not a wine drinking generation, or at least to the industry, it's difficult to figure out where they're at. How did your interest in this become so apparent and fortified?
So I, just like most wine professionals, I think I always say that wine chose me. I didn't choose it. I had a friend at the time who recommended that I drink wine. She thought that I looked like a wine person, whatever that means, but it worked. I started drinking wine with her and then with family, and a somm reached out to me and said, hey, we need more, African-American women in this industry. I recommend taking a course in our local school in DC called Capital Wine School. Shout out to them. Woot woot. But honestly, my passion for wine came organically. I was obsessed with wine knowledge. I had no idea all of the ins and outs of creating wine in that glass that started in that bottle, that when it really started in the vineyard. I was just amazed. So that was my turning point. But to talk about millennials as a whole, I think that the industry has failed to speak our language, which is why I've had success in my social media journey, because I talk about wine my way. And I think millennials are just interested in authentic expression, and we want to be able to enjoy what we like our way. But the best way to do that is to talk about it in a inclusive manner, to create environments where you can explore, and then allow people to just do what they want after that without policing their interests. So being a millennial, we're all about freedom. Let us do what we want.
You have spoken volumes there. You touched on a couple hours worth of stuff, but let's just kind of peel it back, because it's so interesting. And I tease some groups because you said something about being authentic and do it our way, which I think is totally right on. And I think that what does it mean to do it our way? I have this romantic view of wine, and being a retailer, have to depart from it sometimes, because selling wine sometimes is totally different than the romanticism of it. But I think every generation eventually, like you have, lands on that glass of wine and realizes there's something more to the alcohol. Have you seen that with the millennials now that you're talking their language?
Yes. So the issue is, okay, I'm trying to backtrack and think about how I want to explain this. Wine is amazing, right? Every person who's interested in wine, they have that first wine, no matter how expensive it is, no matter the quality, it doesn't matter. Every wine lover has that one wine that they tried and they said, this is something special. There's something to this, right? The problem when it comes to millennials is that we have a hard time getting them to that first step of even trying wines, or if they have a wine that they don't like for the first time and they just say, wine isn't for me, trying to communicate to them to understand that there are so many different expressions and styles of wine. And it's about figuring out what best fits your palate. We have a hard time of having that conversation to get millennials and generations younger, which is Gen X, right? To just try it,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't even know. Did I answer your question?
Well, yes, you did. And that's
Okay, I'm just making sure. Okay.
well, we're just having fun here. We're trying to keep it real, right? So this
Yes,
is
absolutely. Let's do that.
um, well, no, this is the premise of my dad's company back in the 70s and 80s, and that was, I don't like wine. That you heard that all the time. You still do. It's still a very small population, the percentage of the population that drinks wine. But is it because we didn't have the right wine, which sounds like you're saying, or we just outright had a bad one, which there's plenty of on the shelf? And so they have the one that tickles their fancy, and like you, the academia kind of kicks in. You're like, whoa, I wonder what this is all about. So what do you think that is? What do you think that it factor is? I have a hard time with the idea that drinking a glass of apothic red is going to do anything for anybody, or 19 crimes. But at some point, and here I'll give you my notion, you can have a discussion, is when you have an honest glass of wine, a properly made glass of wine that expresses something other than sugar and supermarket shelves, that's when you have that it factor.
So I believe that what you're saying is right and at the same time wrong. Okay.
That's right.
And
I've been known by my wife. I've been told by my wife many times.
I mean, you're so funny. But the truth is, we as wine professionals, or even wine enthusiasts who have been drinking wine for a very long time, have had the opportunity to have amazing wines that we know are just, just take us to a whole nother world, right? We have to make sure that we respect the Barefoots, all the wines you just said, 19 crimes, all of that, because it's a gateway. Yesterday, I had the wonderful opportunity of interviewing a guest on my Instagram live show, Tasting Thursday. And, she's an excellent mixologist. She's absolutely amazing. But the interesting thing was, I asked her when she fell in love with wine. She said she fell in love with wine 10 years ago when she walked into a 7-Eleven and she bought a, what is that wine called from Australia? You know exactly which one I'm talking about too.
It's
Yellowtail.
Yellowtail, yeah.
Okay, now.
7-Eleven?
Oh, yes, they did. All right. But when we hear it, or when professionals hear it, wine enthusiasts hear it, we cringe at the thought, because we understand what quality wine tastes like. But we have to understand that people who are wine novice, it doesn't matter what wine it is, whatever wine gets people through the door to be interested is a win for us. And I think we as an industry, we shun people, just like, I always compare wine to people, and I do it on purpose, because we have all these different people. All people have different preferences, different lifestyle, different choices. And we feel that if we love our lives and we feel that it's superior to someone else, we judge them. And we can't do that. You can still allow people to like what they like and show them based off of whatever they're drinking. You like this? Okay, cool. I'm so happy you're drinking wine. Encourage them. But you know what you could also do? Have this wine. It fits your budget. It fits your palate preference, but it's also better quality. Help people grow rather than shun what they like, because there's a reason Barefoot, Yellowtail, and all these other wines are still in production. People buy it because they like it.
I agree with that completely. And I think that's what White Zinfandel did in 1974 with Bob Trinchero. And my father used to carry Lancers and Mateus and Gallo Rhine wine and Burgundy, and it's always been that way. And I think one of my sort of unanswerable questions is like, what if profit wasn't part of this equation? What if big business wasn't part of the wine business? Let's say it was back to the days of early Burgundy or Bordeaux, and you just drank the wine of your neighborhood because that's what you did, and those are your relationships. So we'll get to that question in a second. But it seems to me that wine has a connection to the soul eventually.
Yes.
And I don't think the entry level wines do that. So they bring to the table the people that haven't experienced it, but it tickles their fancy, and then all of a sudden you can't drink it anymore. Isn't that
Mhm.
fascinating? Right?
It is fascinating, but I think we are talking about culture and for wine novice who are just entering, wine isn't a part of their culture. I grew up in a family, well, one side of my family that doesn't drink alcohol at all. The other side of my family, they're not wine drinkers, but they do drink, right?
Mhm.
And my journey in wine was unique. I mean, I don't know. I guess I have a dry palate just to start. I didn't drink sweet wines in the beginning. That just wasn't me. But it was definitely a cultivating of a culture for myself. And now my family, I'm looking into non-alcoholic wines for my side of my family that doesn't drink. And then the side of my family that does, they count on me to bring wine to the table. And so I think when we talk about people who understand quality of wine, it has become a part of them. Yes, they have that one aha moment with a fantastic wine, but I also feel that when we look at other people who are entering into the space, they are cultivating that new culture for them, their family, their friends. And, it takes time to understand, hey, what you're drinking, I get that you like it, but there's some better options out there. And not all options are breaking the bank, you know?
It's interesting. And I suppose this happens to you now with your family, if you explain that, and other friends that aren't in the wine, world yet. And look, let's face it, only 25% of the population in general drinks wine. So it's
Mhm.
always been a small percentage. But that the conversation at dinner, quite often, if not all the time, with novices or experienced people or enthusiasts, comes to wine because
Mhm.
people really want to know. They really want to kind of understand it and hear it from somebody like you who has experience and understanding. You have that same experience?
Oh my gosh. But it's because I love wine so much. I think like they see the joy that wine brings to me and they just want a piece of the pie. Even again, going back to my family that doesn't drink, I it, the conversation about non-alcoholic wines I know is a bit tight within our community because of the low quality of non-alcoholic wines that have been, the standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
But whenever I am at a family event, they always ask, "Did you bring something for me to try?" And to me, it gets me so excited because wine is supposed to be about community and bringing
Yeah.
people together. And it doesn't matter what your palate is. If you like sweet wines, if you like dry wines, if you like non-alcoholic wines, get it out, Isis, right?
It's that easy.
It's important to remember they want to be a part of the same joy that I experience. And I think that that's the best thing about being a wine professional, being a wine enthusiast, is that we discovered a light, something that has been on this earth since the beginning of time, right? We want people to come in and enjoy it with us, and they want to be a part of that as well.
I have this. I try to be very careful at these dinners. I went to one the other night. Lots of guys, well, maybe one wine enthusiast out of the 7 or 8 people at my table, and I try to be very careful not to dominate the conversation and let people explain, what they like, and more, listen to understand what they're talking about rather than just respond and spout
Hmm.
off what I know about the wine industry,
Hmm.
which doesn't seem to be much even after 35 years. But but interesting you say non-alcoholic because we've been going to the fancy food show for years. Used to be in San Francisco and in Vegas last year, and there's always an overriding theme. Organic
Hmm.
foods like 10 years ago were really hot, and then olive oil was really hot. There's all these different things that come in waves. And this year was non-alcoholic everything.
Yeah.
And I don't get it, frankly, but I want to ask you a question because uh, even the non-alcoholic spirits are like they're hard to drink. They're really I don't
Yeah.
understand it. Why if you want to drink bourbon, drink bourbon. Don't just color the water brown. But there was one guy stuck a bottle of Prosecco in my face. And he
Hmm.
says, "You have to try this." I go, "How did you know that I'm in the wine business?" He says, "I didn't." I said, "Well, I'm not very fond of these non-alcoholic wines. I had them on the show. It happened to be in
Hmm.
California, not too far from here, but it was fabulous, actually. And
Mm.
I tasted it with my staff during our regular tasting. Are you finding
Yeah.
the quality improving in these things? And, why is that happening?"
It is, oh my gosh, the non-alcoholic wine options are getting better and better. And I'm so grateful for it. Now we understand the stats, right? I don't remember exactly what the number is, but since COVID, people have been a little more health conscious. You know, that's the whole movement of clean wines and all the other labels. And when it comes to clean wine and all that, I'm kind of touch and go. But when it comes to non-alcoholic wines, I'm all about inclusion. I'm actually now certified in DEI and understanding the cultural importance of inclusion. Remember, I painted that picture of my family. My side of the family that couldn't drink or does, you know, they choose not to, they felt like they were missing out. They felt like they were missing out on the experience of, you know, my success and my growth. Being able to provide that, they are now able to come to functions and they are excited to taste and drink wine with us, even if it doesn't have alcohol. And I always paint the picture as well. You know, you are working and everyone's leaving for a happy hour after work. There are people who choose not to go out to do these functions because they feel like it's not an environment for them. But if we normalized mocktails, if we normalize non-alcoholic options, when we get together as a community, you're now inviting people who you typically feel left out to come into play. And that helps the wine industry. It helps other industries. We're all about cultivating that money. Come on. But when we decide to, right? But when we decide to leave people out, you know, it's harmful. And I do think that with the great growth of non-alcoholic beverages, it's opening up doors. Even the last week, and I'm going to just say this last point on this. I worked an event with a friend, one of my best friends, and she is pregnant. And, you know, we work in wine. So I'm working and I'm drinking wines and I'm drinking cocktails and she's just watching me, wishing that she could be a part of the fun.
Owie.
But, you know, but if it were normalized that they have great wine options that just don't have alcohol because she can't drink it, wouldn't that change the experience of everybody involved? I want people to shift their thinking and understand that not everything is about you and your preference and what you want. Some options are made for other people who don't have the same experience.
It's a very healthy outlook on it. And I think that's why so much attention is being paid to it now, as well as you brought up briefly this the clean wine movement or the organic wines, biodynamic, orange wines, whatever segment you want to address. It always fascinates me because humans do this. They did something. Let's this case, winemaking was always natural, quote unquote. As you and I know, there's no FDA definition of that, but let's just say
heavy on the
cleaner,
quote unquote.
Right? Yeah. But then we invented all this stuff to put in wine and defoaming agents and all the, you know, mega purple and all that. And then now we boast about not using them anymore. And I just find that fascinating. The monks of the 12th century in Burgundy and Bordeaux and up until probably like the 40s, these things didn't exist. Herbicides, pesticides, and whatever the other one. There's three sides. There's three sides somewhere. Insecticide, pesticides, and herbicide. So about it. Yeah. Is it of interest to the millennial groups or let's just say your followers in general to have access to organic wine? And do you believe that gives the winemaker an excuse to make something that tastes like horse crap?
No. So I'm going to answer the last question first. I don't care what you choose to do. I don't care if it's biodynamic. I don't care whatever label you pick. The wine needs to be good. So we're just going to settle that right now. I don't care. But I think that millennials are interested in paying better attention of what we put into our bodies. And I support that. I think that's why they care if it's organic. They care if it's natural. They care if it's biodynamic because they want the least amount of hands touching and then is necessary. But I do think that I would caution any person who cares about all of the labels, right, to understand that some of these choices are being made to stabilize the wine and to make sure that the quality of the wine is what it should be. And we should educate ourselves to not just ride the train of what other people are saying online. Do research. Organic doesn't mean natural. Natural doesn't mean clean. Clean doesn't mean biodynamic. You know what I mean? Like, do your due diligence to understand what it is that you are putting into your body. That's why I am a supporter of the wine labels. I know everyone in the wine industry is going to be so annoyed by this, but again, it says something. We're in America, like everything is processed. Everyone is getting all of these illnesses, and it's just a lot. And the main issue is what we put into our bodies. So us having clients or consumers who are paying better attention to what they consume is not a problem. It just means more work for you. And I get it. It's annoying. But I think we should care what we put into our bodies.
Well,
I don't know.
Look, the concept has always been everybody has always said you are what you eat, but it's more like you are what you eats, right? We have to understand what's going on below the soil. America is known that we've destroyed many crops with insecticides and herbicides, and it takes years for them to come back in their natural habitat. But I'm going to play devil's advocate. I had a winemaker in here, and I said, "What do you think of this idea of putting ingredients on wine?" And he was against it. And his comment was, "Well, do you go back in the kitchen at a restaurant and ask the chef what's in the food?" Now, we probably should in some cases.
Okay.
But I mean, I use, this is my new coined phrase. I used it earlier. An honest glass of wine would preclude all those things anyway, because I went to a tasting the other day, which I thought was going to be this big boorish guys hanging out for lunch in Beverly Hills. It actually was very fun and very interesting. And it was a vertical of Grange, which was, I, even after 35 years, had very few tastings of. And it was clear. And that was one of the questions that the host asked, like, do you think this is a vertical? And it was obvious to me that this was a vertical of a wine with particular vineyard characteristics. And all you were tasting, and the difference was the terroir, what was happening that year at that time at that place. And that's my definition of an honest glass of wine.
Yes.
Let's face it, Apothic Red, 19 Crimes, those are all formula wines. They're made to taste the same every year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let me ask that question then. I read an article recently, and the guy this author was saying that he was upset with the wine industry, or thinks that we're not doing it right because we're not asking the consumer, what do you want to drink, and formulating wines around what that response is. Doesn't that completely fly in the face of what wine is to be?
Okay. All right. Let me.
Here we go. Hey, you got to take it easy.
I'm trying like, all right, do I tread lightly or do I cause war? So I love wine. Okay. So let's just start there.
We've established that. Okay, good.
Right. I understand the value of terroir. I understand the value of understanding the essence of wine. Whenever you taste the wine, you should understand where it was grown. You should be able to taste the ocean. I want to be able to experience where that wine is and teleport there with my glass. So as a wine lover, I side with that. I understand the notion of, well, we need to be able to ask the consumer what they want, but we already established every person has a different palate. So if you have a desire of a certain flavor profile, okay, let's figure out the region. Let's figure out the year. There are resources out there. And guess what? It's also not even rocket science. The other day I was making mussels for my dad. I wanted to put some wine in there. I looked on the back of a wine I never had. It said Maritime, and it was a Chardonnay. So I knew that it would have everything that I needed in there, and also have a little bit of salinity, maybe, possibly. I don't know. It's just, there's a gamble. But when you are an educated buyer, you can make those gambles and possibly, most likely, choose a wine that best fits whatever you are trying to do. Right. So no, I do not feel that you should craft wines to be a specific thing. I don't think it's necessary. I think that we can use our educated guess in order to find wines that best fit our palate or whatever we are currently eating or anything else. It's not necessary to force anything. I just don't think it's necessary.
Well, it's a profitability issue. I mean, there's obviously a very, very vicious cycle, but this is a profitability thing. I mean, obviously, if we can sell wine that people know, I've told the story before, and I'll make it shorter this time. But I met a woman we were doing a TikTok video, oddly, at the aisle of Ralph's Market here locally in Southern California, and a woman came by to buy wine, and I knew her. She knew that she remembered me, couldn't remember my name, but she says, I go, what are you looking for? She says, something different than I usually drink.
Oh, okay.
That's like music to our ears, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to break out of something. But it's such an emotional product. And she knew I was in the wine industry for forever. I think I coached her kids in Little League or something. And I said, well, here's a couple things that are like J. Lord, what she drank, that are different. And in the sense of they'll take you someplace else, and she wouldn't buy them. And I thought, wow, and I told my intern, I said, what an emotional decision this is for people to buy a wine. And she stated she wanted to break out of her mold, which is great for us, but at the same time was unable to take the recommendation because she looks at the label herself, wants to make that decision on her own. Have you seen the show Drops of God?
No.
It's on Apple TV.
Mm-mm.
Oh, you must.
Drops
It's
of God.
8 episodes. My wife and I binged on it like 2 days, watched all 8 episodes.
Okay. So I need to look into it. I got it.
You'll love it because it centers on wine, but it's about the storytelling of wine. And the reason I brought it up is, do you think that we sort of dig our own grave in promoting the aristocracy of wine, which is most people's apprehension, because we do swirl and sniff, and we do talk about the cedar we smell, and we do talk about the terroir, and what does that mean? And all of a sudden people are going, I don't smell that. I must be stupid. Is it a self-propagating prophecy that we do that?
No. I love
Wow.
the tradition of wine. And I think that I also feel when we talk to the OGs within the wine community who are afraid of change and afraid of trying new things, I think they hear that we want to sacrifice tradition and the full understanding and experience of wine. I think the problem, and I always use this analogy because when I said it that first time, it stuck with me. So when I was in Italy, I hung out with my friend Julian, and his girlfriend is a professional volleyball player. And we were talking about exactly what this conversation is. What do we need to know all of the, okay, pause. Do consumers need to know the ins and outs of wine in order to enjoy it? And this is what I said to her. All right. You're a volleyball player. You know the rules. When you come, you are dressed ready to play. And you come and you are, you're playing volleyball. You tell me, the people who come to enjoy your game, do they need to know all of the, all of the rules? Do they need to dress how you dress? Of course not. You can be a novice who's never seen volleyball and go and be blown away by the skill. But guess what? The more you watch, the more you learn about the game, the more you understand what's going on, the better you're able to participate and enjoy the game. But guess what? You still never have to dress and show up the same way that she does as a professional. And I think that we have to do a better job as a community saying, hey, we're not going to discard our tradition, but we do need to create a safe environment where people can know you don't have to know everything to try wines. But when you're ready, I got you. It's just, it's not that deep. It's just not that deep. It's okay. Just drink.
That's a very articulate and impromptu way to handle that. And I think it was excellent. And her response had to go with, now I get it.
Yeah, she got it immediately because that's her life. She's a volleyball player and she's not expecting the people who come to cheer her on to sit alongside her and play.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The reason I brought the Drops of God up was because we've been tasting with friends for a long time. And at one time, and I've told the story before, we were tasting wine in Napa, and it was the same vintage, two different vineyards, wherever we were at. And my friend says, I think it's a bunch of BS. They actually said bullshit, but I think it's bullshit what you guys say. I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, you say there's, leather and you smell this. He goes, I think it's bullshit. I said, okay, what do you think? I said, taste those two wines again. I go, are they different? He said, yes, they're different. I said, okay, you already started. You just aren't articulating what the difference is. Well, he watched this Drops of God. Now, this is a few years ago that we went through this conversation. He watched Drops of God. They went out that night to dinner. He ordered a glass of the house poured Bordeaux, and he started trying to describe it to his wife. And I thought, there's a victory.
Yeah.
There's one for the Gipper right there. He now has that conversation with himself, at least when he tastes something, to say, wow, this is pretty fascinating. And I'm starting to get it. But isn't it about the storytelling? I mean, you'll if you watch the show, which you should, because I think you'll be fascinated by it. Sometimes knowing the backstory, sometimes understanding what you're doing. You were in Italy, for instance, with your friend.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what better place to enjoy a glass of, Brunello or Barolo or something, and you're sitting watching the Parthenon, or you're at the Colosseum.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that part of the story, though? Isn't that part of the experience where wine really kicks in and you start to realize, yeah, this enhances by understanding this?
Down to how the wine is made, who's behind making the wine, and the experience you have while you're drinking it. All of it matters, and all of it tells a story. And we always talk about how you can have that one glass of wine and in Italy, wherever you are, just enjoying that glass. And then you have it in the States and you're all just in a moment. Your mind is immediately back at that time. And you're remembering the stories that the Somm told you about the wine. I mean, it's the experience. And I think that it's important to emphasize that. Yes, you're drinking wine and we want to make sure that you are enjoying whatever you have, but it's about the moment. And again, like you said, the story, it's all about the story from the past all the way down to the present.
It's just there's so much history to taste. And here's my definition of terroir. We're going to talk about women in wine and people of color in wine. It's a very hot and important subjects that we're facing with. But the concept of terroir, which is typically defined as the soil, the sense of time and place that a wine is made. And I've added that not solely, I think people agree with me in other tomes I've read about it, but it also includes this historical aspect or viewpoint that the winemaker brings to the table. So if he or she is making a wine, and here's an analogy I brought up the other day, and I was not one's better than the other, but if you had two winemakers with 20 years experience and you gave them the same grapes from the same vineyard from the same time, the one winemaker had been in that vineyard for 20 years making the same wine, and one winemaker has traveled the world and maybe even alternate vintages, southern hemispheres, northern hemisphere, whatever, and made 20 vintages from all over the place. And you're going to get different wines.
Absolutely.
And so this says that terroir not only includes the soil and the moment that that wine was made, but what's brought to the table. There's a very interesting movement. There's two movements, as you know, women in wine. And I try to peel back, and people of color as well, how the industry sort of got going. I mean, if you went to the Napa Valley Vintage Association in 1969, you would have seen it was all white males from all walks of life. That I don't know if it was deliberately excluded from, or it was the intimidation of, or was it the unapproachability of the industry? What do you think created the exclusionary features of the industry, and then what we're doing today to help mitigate that problem?
Okay, well, I'll just keep it short and to the point.
There's like another 2 hours worth of
It honestly, no, because the point is this: we live in a misogynistic world, and I don't care to pretend as if reality isn't reality. Women are not too long ago, we were just able to vote, including people of color. So we have to be realistic when we talk about these things. America's very young, but the progressions that we've been able to experience in recent years, and even the things that are happening right now that are being threatened, these are all recent. Having a panel or boardroom or anything, these are things that we still struggle with today. I went to a predominantly white boarding school where they wanted to know about our Black experiences. And we were speaking to a board full of older white women. And so, you know what I mean? And it's very difficult.
Viewpoint's already established.
And so just be clear about history, be clear about what the truth is. Why weren't women a part of the conversation? Why weren't, African Americans or people of color a part of the conversation? Historically, we haven't been welcomed to the table, and so that's why we are still fighting to be able to be welcomed and for our voice to be respected. It's just history.
Do you think this is like that fight never ends? Now, my experience I reached out, I think maybe it was 10 years ago. I
Mhm,
reached out to the Napa Valley, or the Black Association, or Vendor Association. I forgot the name exactly. And I
mhm,
think there were 5 or 10 members. And now apparently there's like 250.
mhm.
But this struggle, this fight, this continued, is it probably never going to end? Probably you always have to raise that flag, always be beating the drum to make sure that people understand that we're here and we're participating.
So I am a woman of hope. Okay.
Good girl.
And my view on issues, not even just within the wine industry, but anything that is connected to the point, when we get to a space where we can be honest about where we are and how we got here, that is the only way we're going to be able to develop tools for change. Unfortunately, we are still in a space where people are afraid of being labeled something, afraid of being canceled, afraid of a lot. And
Mhm.
until we're in an environment where we feel safe enough to be honest about what we see and what we've experienced, until we're in a space where we are empathetic to be able to hear other people's experiences and understand just because it's not my experience doesn't mean that their experience isn't true. We're not going to be able to create the tools that will cultivate a culture change. And again, that's that DEI coming in. Culture change is very scary. Cortisol levels shooting up to the sky,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And it's okay. It's all right. But we have to be able to have the full dialogue. And then for the people in certain circumstances that need change, we need to have trusted people who provide tools that help support us to that change. So the thing is, to answer your question, is it possible? Yes. But unfortunately, people are people, and it's going to take the great majority of us coming together and just being honest and wanting to do better as a community of people with different backgrounds and different stories and different experiences and different, views. We have to get to that place. So it's
It's
possible.
interesting.
It's going to take a while.
Sorry, that's an interesting thought because industry was founded on that. Let's face it. I mean, Robert Mondavi's Italian. Louis Martini was Italian. There's Germans that came to Napa Valley. Look at Mike Gergich, Croatian or Slovenian that came to Napa. And so it always
Mhm.
seemed like there was at least no resistance to ethnicity. And maybe because people of color are obvious, that's the issue. Women are obvious. That's the
Mhm.
issue. And I've done a lot of women on the show, a lot of women that are breaking barriers here with some ideas. We'll talk about a couple in a minute. One of them was Aaliyah. I forgot her last name now, but she was making wine from flowers
Yes.
in
Mhm.
Oakland. And despite the fact that this is an amazing thing to do, I was actually very impressed with this young girl because she not only is making wine, but she was able to get the California ABC to license a 40-foot container in a
Wow.
parking lot as a winery. It's taken me forever to get this building license. And I mean, how do you do that? But she said something very fun and very interesting. She said, I encountered racism, sexism, and grape supremacy.
Ooh, come
And
on,
she,
grape supremacy.
you ever heard that one before?
I have never, but I get it. It
Isn't that
makes
funny?
sense. Yeah.
He's like, I go into a wine shop and I tell them I have wine from flowers. They're like, get out of here. We only deal with wine from flowers. But
Mhm.
recently, some of the women I've had on the show, and I'll talk about them now. Um, when I asked the question, do you feel like you've faced any sexism during this process? And the answer has been no at this point. Now, hopefully that's because of the efforts of you and other people in this industry to break those barriers down, even though women have better palates than men anyway,
Mm.
um, as you know. Who, me? So,
Ooh.
but it's been very interesting. And I'll talk about 3 of them.
Mhm.
I don't remember, I won't say their names, but all 3 of them were creating new avenues of wine packaging. So we're going to talk about
Mhm.
that in a second. Um, and so here they are, they're women trying to break into an industry and break into it with I'm not going to say they're revolutionary ideas. I think they've been around, but they're attacking a segment which is not the primary segment of wine, and that is canned wines
Mhm.
or half bottles in glass, whatever they are, premium wines in alternative packaging.
Mhm.
And I think, wow, that's fascinating that they chose not only as a woman to get into the wine business, but they chose a segment of it that's, I grant it's growing, but it's certainly not part of the mainstream part of the wine business today.
Mm-hmm.
Have you encountered any racism or sexism in your travels that you feel like is pretty overt?
Of course. I think that my experiences are slightly different because I'm Isis and I just move differently in this world. I don't know. Ever since I was a little girl, I've lived in my own bubble, and whenever there are obstacles, I will either push through or I figure a way around. I don't know. That's just how I am. I've had most of my issues within the wine industry hasn't really been with particular wineries per se. I think, well, there's two ways to answer this. Within the wine industry, I think I've had a harder time with clientele. Like, I've been invited to certain wineries, especially, in California, where the winery is warm and kind to me. But when I've gone to their tastings where I am the token, I'm the only Black person in the room, the people who are being hosted will look at me and make me feel slightly uncomfortable. And I have to put on well, I belong here and just enjoy myself despite that has happened. Wow. But I think that most of my issues have been on the content creator side, where there are certain wineries that I know have worked with other friends of mine who are not people of color. But whenever I've tried to work with them, I've received no's or low ball on pay. My friends were very open. And so they'll tell me, well, this is what I charge for this type of content. I'll ask for that and they'll decline, or they'll say, well, we can only afford this, not knowing that I know other people that they've worked with recently. Mm-hmm. So it's okay. It depends. Yeah, it's definitely out there for sure.
Do you think that the recognition of, let's say, the Kim Lewis in New Orleans, or Chastity Cooper, Tanya here in San Francisco, Vincent Morrow at the press in Napa, that these kinds of recognitions help move the needle?
Absolutely. Of course. I want to say this because when you were speaking before, it came to mind and now it's relevant again. Women and people of color have been making wine and assisting in making wine since the beginning of time, just like everyone else. Mm-hmm. It's important that we know that. But also, when I came into the wine industry, I said, oh my gosh, there needs to be more African-American people. Why don't I see people like me here? Once I got into the community of wine professionals, I looked around and saw that there are lots of us here. It's just that we aren't recognized. It's that when it's time to allow us to the table to speak, there's only one that's allowed. And then that one person is constantly hired for everything. So all you see is Julia Coney. All you see is Noelle Burgess. You know what I mean? All you see is Isis Daniel. And you feel like, oh, we're not there, or we've never really made wine. And that's not true. During the Prohibition, all of the Black people who have vineyards, they had to rip up their vines too. When we started over as a country, we already know that as African-American people, we don't get to start at the same place. So when we start making wines again, it's as if the history that we had in this country didn't even happen. So again, we have to have these conversations, but we have to be realistic and honest about what the history is. Women and people of color have always been in wine. It's just that we need to have space to show up and it not be just the same person over and over again. All of my wine friends who are pushing the needle and showing up, every time I'm able to pull someone else and say, hey, I know you want to hire me, but I think this person might be better. We do a lot of that within our community so that we can constantly have new faces show up and represent for us.
That's very
it takes
noble,
a community.
And very noble and bold thing to do. My experience has been, I mean, look, I'm a white male, so let's
it's
okay.
Be
honest with that.
Enjoy.
It's okay. I appreciate that.
Oh my, listen, can I say something just in case it needs to be said? Privilege is a thing.
Right.
Privilege is only not okay when you aren't willing to help other people, or when you benefit from it and you ignore the pain or the hardship of others. Just because you have a privilege is not a problem, okay? But it's important that you care. I have my own privileges as a woman sometimes, even as a Black woman. It depends on the environment and where I am. But How do I care for the other people who are not getting the same? That is it. So
That's
yes, you're a white man, you white man. It's okay.
I feel better. I feel
Okay.
better already. We do try to help. That's kind of who.
Okay, just come on. Just
Well,
be all right.
it's an interesting notion because I have a 3-year-old granddaughter who just was cleared of kidney cancer,
Mhm.
and she spent a lot of time in the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, and it's very tragic to watch a 3-year-old go through that. But my wife, that was not a Freudian slip. My wife said, she goes, there's so many people here who don't have the means that we have, that don't have the family support we have. Forget the money, just the family support, 2 sets of grandparents that are capable of taking care of kids, that don't have access to the health care. I mean, they have access because it's Children's Hospital, but there's still levels of access.
Right.
And so she came away saying, I'm going to start, a charity group or work with a charity group to give people that come into this hospital that are a single parent, that maybe have another child who they have to take to school every day, but the other one's in the hospital getting, cancer treatments. We've got to give them a voice and a chance to have the same treatment that we received, which is very good. And it's sort of the same thing. It's sort of like, if you're not going to use the assets you have and the privileges you have to help other people, then you're very self-centered and very narcissistic about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Help
Hello.
others. I mean, you would think that this conversation is just like, obviously, but again, it goes back to that culture change conversation, right? People who are in a place of certain privileges also have a certain level of power, and people do not want to lose that power. If you are king of the world, why would you not want to be king of the world? I understand, but is it ethical? Is it okay? Is it right? And this is a self-examination thing, but don't my soapbox has started.
Well, you just touched on the worst part of American politics, which is not modern. People try to think that some of the issues we're going through today are contemporary, and they're not.
No, history just repeating itself over and over again.
Your power concept is all about that.
Mhm.
Since we're talking about Washington D.C. and power and politics, I was listening to one of your podcasts. You're talking about the DC Wine Caucus, and I spent some time in Washington working. My wife did too. And I find it fascinating that this caucus exists, and that's a group of senators and congressmen that get together and discuss and hopefully move the needle in favor of the industry.
Okay.
So I wonder if it's kind of an internal lobby group, right? Sort of, it's a lobby thing, but you were laughing like, I live here. I didn't know this thing existed. So what'd you find out about it? What does it do? What do they try to do?
Oh my gosh. So my understanding, and I'm still doing research, and I want to make sure that, whatever I say, listeners, please give me some grace. All right. So, the Congressional Wine Caucus are a group of representatives of all 50 states, where they are representing the wine industry's interests. They work with wine groups like Wine America and other groups like that speak on behalf of all wine people. Now, and, of course, passing legislative laws and all the things. They work with all the committees and right? But I was very disappointed that I didn't know. I signed up for, what is it called? I think it's like winebusiness.com. They send articles to my email every day, which if you are in the industry, if you want to learn more about the wine industry, I recommend doing that. My mom told me, if you want to become an informed professional, read an article a day. So I try my best to do that. That's how I discovered, right? Come on, Mom. But that's how I discovered the Congressional Wine Caucus, because they were doing something. But I was in shock because I didn't know who they were. And I was like, okay, so the lobbyists, they're clearly passing laws and it's all in interest of us, but why don't I know them? I made a post about it saying, yeah, who else knows? My following online ranges. I have wine novice, wine enthusiasts, and wine professionals. The wine professionals didn't know who they were. And to me, I have the question, how is it? And I have followers, my wine professional friends, they've been in the game for a very long time, and some even live in DC. How do we not know who the Congressional Wine Caucus is? And I mean, if you're speaking for us, on behalf of us, representing us, we should know who you are.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem. The Wine Institute of I use the Wine Institute here in San Francisco quite a bit for my information on all things wine. It's a lobby group for wineries,
Hmm.
um, and I suppose they've interacted. But I
Hmm.
wonder what they do, because you said, like you said, there's been no press. You don't read about it. You don't read about decisions. We still have this huge conflict between post-prohibition rules, the 50 state rules, and the Commerce Clause, which doesn't allow. I mean, just frankly, when I sold my company, which was a few months ago, we were processing tax returns in like 32 states,
Mm,
because every state's got a different rule, and
okay.
it's the only product in the world, right? And it's what's
Yes.
really interesting. Maybe you don't know this, that all the laws written up until relatively recently that dealt with interstate shipping of alcohol were only written around wine. They didn't
Hmm.
apply to beer, and they didn't apply to spirits. Some of that's changed, but it's still predominantly wine, and how we protect the wine industries in our own jurisdiction. And that's, basically the wholesalers lobby will prevent. It's just like the NRA will prevent anything with guns to any
Hmm.
needle to be moved, and the wholesalers of America, WSWA, will fight tooth and nail to keep those laws from being removed, because
Right.
they protect the inside. And I wonder about alcohol, why it's, I guess because it's post gangster, business, that these things are protected. I don't know what it is.
Post gangster. It's still gangster. If you really
It
think
is.
about it,
It really is.
I mean, because it's control. During
Yeah.
the prohibition, we know that like spirits in general, it boomed. Underground
Mhm.
bootlegging was a thing. Illegally importing wines from other countries coming in, despite it not, we're not supposed to do it, but the wealthy still had means and money to do it. I think that they looked at it and said, there's so much money that came in. We need to control that and have that. And I
Mhm.
think that it hasn't changed since. I also feel that, you know, if you are trying to do your due diligence to understand our industry, you're going to learn about Congressional Wine Caucus. I believe that's why I came across it. You're going to learn
Mhm.
about all these other lobbying groups because you are trying to invest in your knowledge, right? But I think that most people don't invest in their knowledge. As a whole, most people follow, okay? And it's not a problem. You have to have a queen bee who has a whole bunch of worker bees. It's just how it
That's right.
is,
Sure.
okay? But the thing is, I believe that they found a way to keep the wine industry's interests, laws, everything that we could have influenced to change if we all came together. I believe it's on purpose, right underneath the radar to keep things under control. And I think, now that we know, and and I know, we need to blow this thing up because we have representatives in every single state. And we talk about shipping laws, we talk about tariffs, we talk about all the issues that we have. What if we came together as communities and talked to our representatives and and applied pressure? Would things change? I don't know. We have to
Well,
try it
it's an
out.
interesting thought. And I'll finish with this conversation with this part. There's a woman who wrote a book called Tangled Vines. It's about the arson, fraud, murder, all the bad things in life in the wine
Mm,
sector. It's a woman named Frances Deaconspiel. She's been on the show. Fascinating woman. She stumbled across the issues because of a huge fire in Sausalito a few years ago, and some of her great grandparents' wines burned from the 1800s. She didn't know they even existed. Blah blah blah. And what she comes out of this book saying is that even though these things are felonies, much of these things that happen in the wine industry, there was no federal interest in prosecuting or going
mm,
after anybody. There was just
mm-hmm,
no level. The only reason that Rudy got busted for making fake wine was because he screwed the Koch brothers.
mm-hmm.
Okay. So there you talk about influence and money. Those guys said, look, we got screwed. You're going to do something about it. And then they end up catching this guy and fixing it. Joe Franzia, the famed Charles Shaw creator who passed away recently, nice guy, had a lot of conversation with him. I mean, he was busted as a felony by putting the wrong, bottling a wine as White Zinfandel, but having grape, Grenache or Carignan in it. And they fined him. And so there's no huge awareness of what I'm trying to get to in the federal level to worry about it, right? And so maybe
Right.
you're right. Maybe it takes everybody to gang together and start putting pressure to change some of these rules because they're ridiculous and archaic.
You
And
know, what we have to do, okay, so my research has been really trying to understand wine in the legislative world.
Mhm.
Because when we talk about ways and means, we talk about agriculture, we talk about all of the committees and the different committees that wine is connected to.
Mhm.
It makes me question, how do we get the average Joe to care? And I think once we are able to communicate wine at that level, we'll be able to start asking real questions as a community. That's why, I've been thinking about this and researching this for a while. And then, traveling, I'm at my travel season, so things had to pause for a second. But my goal has been trying to figure out how to talk about wine in business and in, again, wine law, legislative lobbying, all of that, the same way I was able to talk about wine in a community drinking way. I got people to be interested because I spoke wine in their language, but I need people to understand all of the different ways wine is connected to our everyday lives. And if you care, you can be a part of this conversation. But I also feel that it will bloom to really being a part of a lot of the politics that we are afraid to discuss and afraid to be a part of and to vote and to come out and truly be a part of the process. I think wine could be a catalyst to that if we discover how to communicate it effectively.
Good point. Yeah. That the congressional caucus guys or women are going home and having a really nice glass of wine and
Yeah.
saying, yeah, I really enjoyed being on this caucus, but they're not,
Right.
it's taught me a lot about wine, but it's kind of hard to move the needle in favor. And I suppose because really, and I used to use this number when I was pitching things at the Wine of the Month Club, which was, really, truly, if you ask the Wine Institute, 25% of the population drinks wine, of which, that includes somebody that goes to Olive Garden and orders the house Chianti. They don't really understand, but they know what they're drinking. It's a small population to rally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not affecting me directly, why do I care? I can go to the market and buy a glass of wine or buy a nice wine. It's already been 50 minutes, which is fascinating because it happened very quickly. This show airs in Atlanta on a radio station as well, so I have to keep it around 50 to 52 minutes to get it done. But I think we could do this again.
Oh,
and probably continue the conversation.
Yes, I would love that.
As things happen. Are you ever in Southern California or in the Napa region in particular?
I was just there 2 weekends ago.
Work
So
or research or fun?
Work, but I had a lot of fun. I was creating content at the Blue Note Jazz Fest in Napa. And so we were able to do that last year, this year again, and honestly, wonderful time. This year they had a wine garden where they featured a lot of Black wines that I feel deserve, shout out my favorite winery that was featured. I'm only going to shout out one, was Theopolis. And I love her wines. Theo, excellent winemaker, vintner, does all of it, and her wines are excellent. So shout out to Theopolis.
I think I saw some footage that you released from there.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I'm going to lean on you after in the next week or two. I have a TV show that I'm pitching, and it's I have one of Anthony Bourdain's producers on my team, and it's about the stories of wine, basically. And I'm going to lean on you because you were talking about Dwayne Wade and his wines. So there must be a lot of celebrity people of color that have wines or want to have wines. These are the stories I want to tell, amongst many others.
Yes.
To highlight that, I was at an Armenian event, oddly, I'm Armenian, and somebody showed me a picture of a cellar that he's working on for a client. And stacked on the picture, which is bizarre, was a Huet, which is a Loire Valley wine. Well, this guy Huet was like arrested during the war and put in jail by the Nazis and
Oh my
has
God.
this story behind him is incredible. So this guy's like showing me this picture because he's building the cellar. I
Mhm.
said, do you have any idea what this wine represents? And that's what I'm trying to get to. Like, what does this wine represent? What does Dwayne's wine represent? What does Theopolis represent? I think those are the stories that we want to tell.
Oh, yes. And so that's what I do on Tasting Thursdays on Instagram Live when I interview different wineries. I've been doing it since 2020 during the pandemic. Different wineries, winemakers, wine lovers alike will come on and we talk about their story, their journey over a glass of wine. And it's fun. I sing my little jingle that people love. We have a great time, but really the story behind wine is my passion, getting to know the people. So I'm absolutely down to help. Just let me know what you need.
Awesome. We're gonna have fun. Thank you so much for the time today, and look forward to. I'll send you the credentials when this thing gets published, which will be probably pretty soon, since I'm a little tight on my schedule right now. But fascinating conversation, and wish you luck in all the future endeavors. And certainly, if we're cross paths somewhere in town, we have to have a glass of wine.
Absolutely, I got you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalamkarian. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.